Good afternoon. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Lauren Noble, and I'm the founder and executive director of the William F. Buckley Jr. program. We're privileged to have Professor Donald Kagan with us here today. Before I introduce him, I'll say a few words about the Buckley program. Our mission is to promote intellectual diversity on Yale's campus. Throughout the academic year, we sponsor lectures, seminars, conferences, firing line debates, and much more. We have 175 student fellows, and during the summer months, we sponsor students doing internships at a variety of publications and think tanks. I know many of you here today are in town for your class reunions. Welcome back to New Haven. We're glad to provide a safe space for those who believe in the exchange of ideas. The latest confirmation of the fragile state of free speech and free minds on campus came last week with the announcement that Nicholas and Erica Christakis have resigned from their posts in Silliman College. In spite of these alarming developments, the Buckley program remains committed to defending free speech and resisting intellectual conformity. This is precisely why we need your support, and to those here who have been generous to our cause, thank you very much. Professor Kagan has been a wonderful mentor to the Buckley program since the very beginning, serving on our board of directors. The Sterling Professor Emeritus of Classics and History, Professor Kagan has taught at Yale for more than 40 years. A former dean of Yale College, he earned his master's degree in classics from Brown University and his doctoral degree in history from Ohio State University. A celebrated historian, he is the author of many books, including The Peloponnesian War, On the Origins of War and the Preservation of Peace, and Thucydides, The Reinvention of History. He was awarded the National Humanities Medal in 2002, and in 2005 delivered the 34th Jefferson Lecture in the Humanities. We're honored to have him speak today on history, Queen of the Humanities and a Liberal Education, and key to the mysteries of the human predicament. Please join me in giving Professor Kagan a warm welcome.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege to be here in the company of a collection of Yale's distinguished alumni. I myself didn't have the privilege of being a student at Yale, but I made up for it. Both of my sons graduated from Yale. One of them couldn't stop until he had a PhD. One of them married a Yalie. And then I guess I shouldn't forget to mention my granddaughter will be a junior here next fall. And so I think of myself as having some small attachment to this institution, in spite of what's going on here. It's a pretty weird title I've given to my talk, but I wanted to get in all the things I want to talk about. First of all, a claim that history is the queen of the humanities and of a liberal education, and that somehow in there is buried the key to the mysteries of the human predicament. It'll sound perhaps a bit grandiose, but it's all true. I come to you as the defender of the faith, of the humanities as they were understood ever since the invention of the concept many centuries ago. Their goals were nicely stated by the Renaissance humanist Pietro Paolo Vergerio some 6 centuries ago as the purposes of a liberal education. Here's what he says. We call those studies liberal which are worthy of a free man, those studies by which we attain and practice virtue and wisdom, that education which calls forth trains and develops those highest gifts of body and mind which enable men and which are rightly judged to rank next in dignity to virtue only. For to a vulgar temper, gain and pleasure are the one aim of existence. It's interesting, I think most college advisors these days hold to their view. Why go to college? Gain and pleasure. To a lofty nature, however, moral worth and fame are the goals of such an education. The training of the intellect was meant to produce an intrinsic pleasure and satisfaction indeed, but it also had practical goals of importance to the individual and to the entire community. To make the humanistically trained individual eloquent and wise, to know what is good, and to practice virtue, both in public and private life. Such also was the understanding of the ancient Greeks and of the Renaissance humanists, but it is not, I fear, of many teachers of the humanities today, who deny the possibility of knowing anything with confidence, of the reality of such concepts as truth and virtue, who seek only gain and pleasure in the modern guise of political power and self-gratification as the ends of education. Among them, it is common to reject any notion of objectivity, of truths arrived at by evidence or reasoning external to mere whims or prejudices. One famous professor, who I regret to say spent some time at Yale, deplored such ideas as the ones I've just mentioned, objectivity, truth, etc., as foundationalism, defined as any attempt to ground inquiry and communication in something more firm and stable than mere belief or unexamined practice. Now, such views are proposed mainly by literary critics, but their significance is much broader than that for the interpretation of literature. They assert that all studies are, in fact, literature. All, therefore, subject to the same indeterminacy as all language. In fact, even death is merely, according to one of them, the displaced name for a linguistic predicament. It should not be surprising, then, to learn that, I quote again, the bases for historical knowledge are not empirical facts, but written texts, even if these texts masquerade in the guise of wars or revolutions. You might think that there was a Second World War, but it was actually the second collection of texts. What we know of history, after all, we learn from written accounts whose rhetoric, and again I quote, allows for two incompatible, mutually self-destructive points of view, and therefore puts an insurmountable obstacle in the way of any reading or understanding, including, I would presume, any reading or understanding of the quotation I just read. But ideas have made their way even into the study of the classics. I mean, such ideas as I've just described. But I remain grateful that I have spent much of my life in the exploration of the ancient civilizations, especially that of the Greeks and the Romans, more particularly the Greeks, because they are at the root of modern civilization. So like us in many ways, and so different in others. They offer a perspective removed from the prejudice of time and place that threaten to distort our understanding, and yet continually relevant and illuminating to those who will examine them with an open mind to the possibility that useful wisdom can be found in their thought and experiences. The French novelist and politician André Malraux once said that all art is a revolt against man's fate. If he is right, Sophocles' plays, for instance, the other tragedies, and much of ancient Greek literature are not art. Malraux seems to me to reflect the romantic view, the one that emerged in the 19th century as Romanticism, that is determined to use the artist as an individual apart from, superior to, and in rebellion against the established order. Sophocles, like Aeschylus, the other tragedian, and Thucydides, the historian, was very much a part of his society. The great poet fought its battles as a soldier. He understood and appreciated its necessity and excellence, even as he probed its dilemmas and its weaknesses. His plays, among other things, helped their audience to understand and to come to terms with man's fate. It is man's fate, part of the tragic human condition, to revolt and to struggle against the negative elements. But human excellence, virtue, even survival, depend on the establishment of a decent world order, a decent social order, and its defense even against the most passionate and sincere rebels who would smash it in the search of some imagined perfection beyond human grasp. Because he was part of the society in which he lived, and he understood its needs and virtues, he could compel his fellow citizens honestly to confront its conflicts and its deepest contradictions. They did not suppress or scorn, or what is even worse, ignore him. Instead, they honored him with prizes, election to the highest military and political office, and with deep and abiding reverence. Would that all this were possible for modern artists and their audiences in the world today. To understand this question, which involves both literature and philosophy, one must study history, my own special field of interest, the dearest to my heart. I want to make the case that history, defined not meanly in the current style as an infinitely malleable tool to be used to achieve current political ends, but as its Greek founders of the genre did. History, in that sense, can be the most valuable approach, I think, to achieve the proper goals of the humanities. The world we live in is a difficult place to try to make a case for the value of history. Through the centuries, its claim has rested chiefly on its search for truths arrived at by painstaking research conducted with the greatest possible objectivity, explaining events by means of human reason. Its various goals, as one distinguished scholar put it, were to provide an example, to constitute a warning, to point to likely developments in human affairs. The ancient Greek historians, the earliest and still among the greatest, set the agenda, taking as their subjects large events that affected great numbers of people in dramatic and powerful ways. Herodotus, the first true historian, wrote of the war in which a band of small Greek city-states defended their freedom against the assault of the vast and mighty Persian Empire. He wrote, he said, "So that time may not blot out from among men the memory of the past, and that the fame of the great and marvelous deeds done by the Greeks and foreigners may not be lost, and especially the reason why they fought against each other. Here, from the very beginning of the genre, we can discern the special place occupied by history among humanistic studies. Like literature, specifically like the epic poetry of Homer, it has the responsibility of preserving the great, important, and instructive actions of human beings, individually and in the mass, so that we may marvel at them, but also learn from them. It sets the historian the task, however, not merely of describing events in evocative language that will impress them on human hearts and arouse an emotional response, but also, like philosophers, to explain their meaning by the use of reason. Thucydides, a younger contemporary of Herodotus, took on the same assignments. He wanted to memorialize the great events of his day, the war between Sparta and Athens. Thucydides tells us that he undertook his history in the belief that it would be great and noteworthy above all the wars that had gone before. For this was the greatest upheaval that had ever shaken the Hellenes, extending also to some part of the barbarians, one might say even to a very large part of mankind. No one who has read his dramatic accounts of the debates in the various assemblies, and especially the heart-rending account of the destruction of the Athenian forces that invaded Sicily, no such person will doubt his literary artistry in achieving that goal. But Herodotus' story had a happy ending, while Thucydides' tale was far grimmer. The account of the Persian War seems filled with sunshine. The report of the Peloponnesian War seems to have been written in twilight. Herodotus, like Homer, tells good stories for their own sake, whether he believes them or not. Most of his explanations of events credits human agents alone. But again, like Homer, he leaves plenty of room for the intervention of the gods. Thucydides ruthlessly excludes everything not clearly relevant to his task and employs cold reason alone in his explanations. Herodotus obtained the necessary information by asking people who seemed to know anything he was interested in, sometimes reporting more than one account of things without choosing among them, sometimes making a choice based on the exercise of reason and what seemed to him likely. This was not good enough for Thucydides. As to the facts of what happened, he said, I did not learn them from any chance informant, nor did I think it proper to write down what seemed probable to me, but by investigating each of them with the greatest possible accuracy, both those events at which I was present myself and those I learned from others. And the discovery of these facts was laborious, since eyewitnesses to the same events did not give the same reports of them, either because of partisanship or failure of memory. Thucydides understood that his careful attention to factual accuracy came at a literary price. Perhaps, he says, the absence of the fabulous from my account will seem less pleasing to the ear. But he judges the sacrifices necessary to achieve a higher goal, a philosophic one, with great practical application. And I quote Thucydides again. If those who wish to have a clear understanding both of the events of the past and of the ones that someday, as is the way in human things, will happen again in the future, in the same or similar way will judge my work useful, that will be enough for me. It has been composed not as a prize essay in a competition to be heard for a moment, but as a possession forever. That's a pretty strong claim, and guess what? It worked that way. Those lines seem plainly to be a critique of Herodotus and then a bold claim to contribute to rational philosophic understanding. Even beyond that, I believe they lay claim to practical usefulness in dealing with real human problems in the real world. These are the missions for the historian: to examine important events of the past with painstaking care and the greatest possible objectivity, to seek a reasoned explanation from them based in the fullest and fairest possible examination of the evidence in order to preserve their memory and to use them to establish such uniformities as may exist in human events, and then to apply the resulting understanding to improve the judgment and the wisdom of people who must deal with similar problems in the future. That is the legacy the Greek historians handed down to their successors, which, in my opinion, when practiced well, makes Clio the queen of the humanities, standing between, and if you will permit me, slightly above her noble handmaidens, the muses of literature and philosophy. So say I, but not everyone has agreed. Critics of history have been legion, running the gamut from the sophisticated, wickedly witty Voltaire, who asserted that history is a pack of tricks the living play upon the dead, to the simpler remark of Henry Ford that history is bunk. A more serious critique favoring literature came soon after the invention of history from no less a figure than Aristotle in his Poetics, who says, "A poet's object is not to tell what actually happened, but what could and would happen, either probably or inevitably." The difference between a historian and a poet is not that one writes in prose and the other in verse. Indeed, the writings of Herodotus, he says, could be put into verse and it would still be a kind of history, whether written in meter or not. The real difference is this, that one tells what happened and the other what might happen. For this reason, poetry is somewhat more philosophical. The word in Greek is philosophoteron, and serious than history, because poetry tends to give general truths, while history gives particular facts. By a general truth, I mean the sort of thing that a certain type of man will do or say, either probably or necessarily. That's what poetry aims at. A particular fact is what Alcibiades did or was done to him. That's what Aristotle said. Of course, he would have claimed the same advantage for philosophy which he has claimed for literature, which must also be more philosophos than history. He had great learning and wisdom, but like Homer, even he occasionally nodded. May Aristotle forgive him. The primary source for what Alcibiades did and suffered, in fact, is Thucydides. And it is hard to believe that Aristotle did not read his history. If he did, this assertion is truly astonishing. For, as we have seen, Thucydides took the greatest pains to discover what particular people did precisely in order to establish general truths about human behavior. he stood at a position on the road from literature to philosophy. Like the poet, he was free to select his topic, to define its boundaries, to treat some events and topics at greater length than others, to emphasize some things and touch lightly on others. Unlike the creative writer, however, the historian may not invent characters or events or chronology, but must report with the greatest possible accuracy the doings of real people, keeping to the true order in which they happened. To the extent that he fails in those responsibilities, he is not a bad historian, but no historian at all. Yet, if he follows the rules carefully, establishes the facts and reports them in their true chronological order, and does no more, he is still not a historian, but in fact what he is a chronicler. It's not enough to record a certain level of events each year, however accurately. The historian must select a topic of importance. Even a narrative history must organize and arrange events in such a way as to reveal their significance most effectively. He must try to explain why things happened as they did and what may be learned about human affairs and behavior in general from the events he has studied. In this respect, his work must be philosophical. But unlike philosophers and their post-Enlightenment offspring, the social scientists, who usually prefer to explain a vast range of particular phenomena by the simplest possible generalization, historians must be prepared to explain the variety of behavior in various ways. The well-known lines of the ancient Greek poet Archilochus present the two fundamental choices. The fox knows many tricks. The hedgehog only one big one. This may work in the animal kingdom, but in the world of human affairs, wildly complicated by the presence of individual wills and of different ideas of what produces or deprives people of happiness and honor, in what does interest consist and of what there is to fear, extremely general explanations are neither useful nor possible. Historians, in the first instance, need to be foxes, using as many tricks as they can to explain as many particular things as accurately and convincing as they can. Then they should try to find revealing examples from the wide variety of human experiences to support generalizations of varying breadth. They should not expect to find the one big trick that will explain everything, but the lesser generalizations that can be treated by other understandings of the evidence and by new human experiences as they arise, which can still be interesting and useful. It is this mixed path taken by the historian, chiefly of the fox, but with a necessary element of the hedgehog, that promises the best results. The poet, inspired by a unique personal perception and understanding, may shed a more intense and powerful light on some human affairs than the most careful and serious historian. We may admire its brilliance and originality, but are his revelations right? When we think so, it is by intuition that we are convinced, or by some feeling that the poet's perception accords with our own experience. But everyone has his own intuition and his own experience. The literary road to the understanding of human things calls for generalizing from a single perception. It can be galvanizing, inspiring, but not satisfying to the mind. The literary experience is primarily aesthetic and emotional, not intellectual or practical. Philosophy is a word and concept harder to define. But among the many definitions I find in my dictionary, the following strikes me as the most central. Inquiry into the nature of things based on logical reasoning rather than empirical methods. The pursuit of philosophy does not preclude the study of human experience to provide material for contemplation and analysis by ordered reason, but experience is clearly subordinate and ancillary. Even Aristotle, who for centuries was known as the philosopher, and he liked to begin his inquiries with references to the experience and thoughts of real people, even he did not investigate these widely or deeply, but just until they produced the inevitable intellectual difficulties, the Greek word is aporia, to which he then applied his great powers of logic and reason. There are great advantages for our understanding of the nature of things in it, pointing out sloppy thinking and helping to correct it, the ability to analyze things that appear unitary, or to bring together others that seem hopelessly disparate, the search for simpler, more general principles than those available to the empirical students of human experience, among others. But philosophy inevitably leads to metaphysics, that is to say, the investigation of first principles and the problem of ultimate reality, which over the millennia has led to massive disagreement, no progress, to cynicism and rejection. Wags have described the pursuit of metaphysics as looking into a perfectly dark box for a black cat that doesn't exist. More seriously, the situation has driven professional students of philosophy to such despair as to reject entirely the most basic and compelling questions as impossible. In fact, as non-existent, merely the result of bad thinking or improper grammar. In that spirit, the Encyclopedia Britannica defines philosophy narrowly as, quote, the critical examination of the grounds for fundamental beliefs and an analysis of the basic concepts of such beliefs. That's it. That's philosophy, according to modern philosophy. Aristotle must have rolled over in his grave when he first learned of the thin gruel modern teachers have made of his rich philosophical porridge. Fortunately, a small band of scholars has not given up the search for wisdom that is true philosophy, but their tribe is small and their enemies legion. A field of study in such shape, seems to me, cannot help us much in our efforts to comprehend the human condition. Now, none of this is to say that history is without its problems for the purpose I put forward. Although, in its moderate way, it has not suffered quite so badly as philosophy from the linguistic analysts or literature from the pseudo-philosophers, it has not escaped the assaults of postmodernism in its various forms. A major assault is in the area of subject matter and attitude. The traditional great events and subjects, that is to say, high politics, constitutions, diplomacy, war, great books, great ideas, they are not to be considered, except to show why they must be excluded as the product of dead white males engaged in the permanent process of oppressing good ordinary people of one kind or another. The purpose of the enterprise is not to seek the truth with the greatest objectivity one can muster, but to raise the consciousness of the oppressed, to bring them the self-esteem they will need to overthrow the current version of this ancient establishment. Some historians may not be convinced by these beliefs, observing that postmodernists assert that there is no such thing as truth. only self-interest, prejudice, and power, that there is no objectivity, that all statements of fact or values are relative, and claims to the existence or search for objective truth are part of the racket by which the ruling groups try to retain power. Some doubters may point out that the opinions of these making these claims should be ignored, since by their own admission their claims cannot be objective or true, but merely devices for them to gain power. Although historians and universities have given far too much ground to such mindlessness promoted by contemporary political partisanship, as historians they are better situated than their colleagues in the other humanities to recover their senses. They know that the current fad of skepticism and relativism is as old as the sophists of ancient Greece and had a great revival with the Pyrrhonism of the 16th century. On both occasions, their paradoxical and self-contradictory glamour yielded in time to common sense and the massive evidence that some searches are more objective, some things truer than others, however elusive perfect objectivity and truth may be. Historians have reason to know this and to resist the blatantly subjective and untruthful assault of the modern-day sophists, confident that if they hold or return to their traditional methods, which allow them to correct errors in our beliefs about the past, or sometimes to bring new evidence and perceptions that may have the effect of refining or perhaps even confirming what used to be believed. For history is a discipline in which the improvement of understanding is not impossible. It is not random. It is not merely cyclical. It is cumulative. Now, perhaps you will think my own approach is not entirely objective, that it is shaped by what the French call a déformation professionnelle. So let me say at once, it goes without saying, that literature, philosophy, and history have long each been valuable roads to the understanding of the human condition, and all make important contributions. But I confess that as to their relative merits, my mind is not completely open. Perhaps my view could be compared with that of the clergyman who listened to a heated debate among his fellow divines, each claiming the superiority of his own sect. At last, he intervened with these words: "Friends, let us not quarrel among ourselves in this sectarian fashion. We all seek to work God's will. You in your several ways, I in his." But I believe there is more to my claim than mere prejudice related to professional deformation. 2 millennia ago, the Roman historian Livi's introduction to his great narrative account of his nation's history included this observation: what chiefly makes the study of history wholesome and profitable is this, that you behold the lessons of every kind of experience set forth on a conspicuous monument. From those you may choose for yourself and for your own state what to imitate. From these, mark for avoidance what is shameful in the conception and shameful in the result. That is a view of the purposes of historical study that went out of favor with professionals in the 19th century and is not thought respectable in our time. As a result, it has been increasingly harder to persuade people that they have anything to learn from history. Same time, the retreat by professors of history from the tradition of writing narrative accounts that explain the past by telling a story has further repelled potential readers. This has not, however, deterred millions of people hungry for historical writing from reading those historians who will interpret the past by narrating a story. and are alert to the moral implications, personal and political, of the story they tell. And why should it be otherwise? The fact is that we all need to take our moral bearings all the time as individuals and as citizens. Religion and the traditions based on it were once, of course, the chief source for moral confidence and strength. But we have to face the fact that their influence has faded in the modern world. But the need for a sound base for moral judgment has not. If we cannot look simply for moral guidance firmly founded on religious precepts, it is natural and reasonable to turn to history, the record of human experience, as a necessary supplement, certainly if not a substitute. History, it seems to me, is the most useful key we have to open the mysteries of the human predicament. Is it too much to hope that one day we may see Clio ascend her throne again and resume her noble business at the same old stand? Thank you.
We have time for a few questions. Just raise your hand and I'll come around with the mic.
Who are you reading these days? Which modern historian are you reading?
I'm trying to remember. I have several books on my desk. I'm trying to think which one can I think of. This is what happens when you're as old as I am. You forget what you read this morning. If I remember, I'll tell you. I'm sorry.
That you wanted to recommend to, let's say, a young man or woman in her early teens? Do you have any thoughts?
2 books. Any kind of book. You don't care what it's about. Because, I mean, the range of possibility. I don't think I'm going to succeed there either. It depends what you're after, of course. There is such a thing as reading for fun without expecting very great payoff except the fun, and as opposed to the great works. One can always cite one of the great works because they're great for a reason. And my own prejudices, I guess I'll just, I mean, it's obvious I think very well of Thucydides. He was, as Herodotus was the inventor of the subject of history in a general way, Thucydides, I mean, there's a mile between Herodotus and Thucydides, because Thucydides in the 5th century BC was thinking like a person is supposed to think in our own time. So I think Thucydides is not fun read in the sense of an easy read or sense of a lot of nice cute stories and stuff like that. But it's filled with sharpness of intellect and with and interestingly enough, with passion, because he seems to be writing like a scientist almost about the events of the war that he's talking about. But this was, for him, I'm trying to think, it would be like an American of my generation, World War II. For a different American, maybe a better comparison, in fact, would be the Civil War. The event of his life, the event that shaped everything, that changed everything. And so he looks at it with the greatest possible objectivity that he can put together, even though he has tremendous prejudices about everything that's going on. But he tries very hard to do his job, as we would say, right. And from time to time, some of the emotion and passion that he feels about what's going on comes through. And he also speaks about issues that are ancillary to the war, but central to human beings, and gives you his view of how people behaved in certain situations, and does so in a way that illuminates those situations, but also illuminates many that you know about. So I guess I will just rest on my old friend Thucydides.
Professor Kagan, I'm here for my 50th reunion, and it occurs to me that 50 years ago, historians were just starting to grapple with the development and communication via telephone and the oral history project that started, I believe, at Columbia University. How will recent developments in communication, and particularly email, affect what historians do and what they're able to do, and how might what results be similar or dissimilar to the way the 24-hour news cycle has evolved?
Well, you'd have to be smarter than I am to predict it, but in a way, it doesn't. I'm inclined to say it won't make as much difference as you might think, because the most fundamental characteristic of the stuff you're talking about is it will multiply the amount of historical source material available to the historian. And so he will have more stuff than my generation did to look at. And what will be the consequence of that? I mean, there is so very much of it that it's an interesting question as to how useful it can be, because of how hard it will be to master it. There's so very much of it. But also, then there is the question of the type of stuff that you get. If people put things on the computer, only candidates for the president hide them. Everybody else has all this access to everything, and so much of it is distracting rather than helpful. I guess it'll make the historian's job harder. It might produce better results if it produces information that we used not to be able to get to. But secrecy will be harder, but it won't disappear. I don't know anything about the technology, but people will increasingly find ways not to let you see what they say, because that's always a very important goal.
I need to ask who you might be thinking of.
Oh, gee. I can think of no example of somebody taking advantage of modern technology to hide things from other people. Can't think of any of that.
Is there anything that makes you optimistic about this?
I can't hear you.
Is there anything that makes you optimistic about a reversal in terms of the use?
About what?
The reversal of the use and misuse of history, or do we have to deal with Hegel in terms of what we learn from history is that we learn nothing from history? Do we have to wait for centuries for this to reverse?
Oh no! I find that nothing has really changed in that respect. Whatever it is that we have available to us to shape our view of history, what has changed is the vast amount and the character of some of that. But that's all there is, and we then have to think about it. And we think about it with the same minds, same kinds of minds that men have always had, except each place and each era has its own peculiarities, and that will continue to be what it was. I have tried to write about events in my own lifetime in the same way that Thucydides did, and so on. And I didn't feel as though I was in any seriously different place than he was, except in terms of quantity more than anything else. I'm pretty optimistic if you think that there has been valuable historical work done in the past which can help us understand things better. And I do think there is such stuff. I think that will continue to be true. I'm not pessimistic about that. I think the game will become very much more complicated, continues to become more complicated. That's about it.
Professor Kagan, it feels like in this...
I can't hear you very well.
Sorry. It feels like in this election cycle, history is somewhere down at the 5% level in terms of importance. It's felt like as the media exposure becomes greater, the importance of a historical understanding is less and less. And it seems like undergraduates in places like Yale are flocking to the engineering and other areas and flocking away from history and the humanities. And I would think that people like you who have a highly grounded understanding of history are getting fewer people in your classes and not having the influence you did before. What ideas do you have about how to turn this situation around?
I certainly don't have anything brilliant about it. I think you've described reality, and a whole kind of collection of forces are at work, all working against the proper study of history and the understanding that it might have something valuable to contribute to our understanding of the world and human race. And I don't see anything working in its favor. Everything I see that emerges works against that operation. Now, the interesting thing is the students are just as open to it as they ever have been. If by some mistake university gets somebody teaching a course who's good at it, students magically turn up in spite of all those evil qualities that have been imputed to them and have been imposed upon them. They show up. When I came to Yale in 1969, there was a core of teachers that were here at Yale who were just marvelously good at the game. And the subjects they taught ranged. It wasn't just this or that or the other thing. Whatever they were good at, they were really good at it. And the result was, for instance, there was no compulsion, but the largest major at Yale in that period was history. The second largest major at Yale was English, meaning English literature taught in a different way from the way I've been criticizing here. But one cannot be very optimistic about that because those people don't seem to be getting turned out anymore. Their teachers were different from the teachers of the great ones I'm talking about now. So that whatever these qualities are that make for fine teachers in the humanities, they are not showing up in great numbers. And that's the key for students who go to college. They don't much care about anything except what they perceive as the quality of the teacher. And I don't know what to do about that. Yeah.
Professor Kagan, when I look through the Yale Blue Book, online now, of course, and through the curriculum available at Harvard, one thing that I notice in the history department of each place is the proliferation of small, very targeted courses which seem to me to reflect whatever particular course of study a professor may be working on at that time as part of a graduate thesis or a book or whatever, and fewer broad survey courses. For instance, like you taught for years and years and years. How, to what degree has this been discussed, or was this discussed, and is it being discussed among the members of the Yale History Department, and what are people saying, and why does this trend continue to what seems to me to be an extraordinary degree?
Yeah. No, there is no conversation about such things. It's inconceivable. I remember when I arrived.
Has it never been brought up?
Not in my presence. No. But when I came here, the kind of course you're talking about, each one of these great teachers taught one like that. That was understood. It was just, if you were part of being a professor of history at Yale, meant you would teach a lecture course, and if you were good, a lot of students would show up to take part in it. And that was true. I came here from Cornell. It was the same there. And but what was beginning to happen, and what became more and more the case, you've described it accurately, was that when I began teaching as an assistant professor in Pennsylvania, it was understood. Of course, I would teach a general course on Greek history. That would have been a kind of a size course. And they wouldn't ask me, would you like to do that? I mean, they hired me to be a Greek historian, and that's what a Greek historian does, among other things, maybe. But he sure does that. Well, then I noticed when I was at Yale, and young folks came up, and they would the first thing they did, none of them ever taught a lecture course. They taught, what did they teach? They taught a seminar. And it was a seminar on wool distribution in Bukovina in 1354, maybe. What was it? It was his dissertation. It was understood, you will teach your dissertation. I think, so I don't have a really good answer to your question, but I think part of it was sort of the emergence of a kind of a, it happened, I think, in the 60s, the sort of the imperial professorship in general, in which suddenly the country discovered that they thought higher education was very important because the Russians had a bomb. Really, that was it. We had to keep up with the Russians. They were doing allegedly wonderful things with education. We had to do the same. You were going to say?
I was going to say.
Yeah. Professor, this is a serious question. When you read the Greeks and the Romans, do you read them in the original Latin and Greek, or do you read a translation?
No, I read in the original.
That's what I thought. Okay.
We couldn't get away with that in the old days.
Really? Yeah.
I'm sorry. Was there?
If I may follow up with one question, does the same trend toward micro course focus
Yeah.
Extend to other disciplines? Is it present in the history department? Is it present in other humanities courses? And is it present in the science departments? The only investigation I personally have made is in the history.
Yeah, yeah. I can't answer for the sciences. I think the sciences are less affected by all of these modern trends than anybody else. They are largely driven by the same values, the same concerns, for the most part, as they always have been. I think where the greatest adaptation to external considerations has taken place, number one, in social science, because they never had a tradition that was really what I think of as a proper college tradition. And then in the humanities, who have become more and more like the social sciences. So I would say that's part of the deal. But of course, what we have just described is only part of the major change that's taken place. The other is, what is it that you actually teach? Not just what size course and so on and so forth, but increasingly they try to be contemporary, to try to respond to what they deem to be current concerns, trends. It's sometimes straight politics, sometimes politics under the table, but they need to be showing how that will affect the job situation in 3 weeks. It's that kind of thing. You know, the whole idea of asking yourself the question that used to be a question we argued about on faculties years ago, which was, what is the best course of study to produce a well-educated undergraduate, and we can argue about what kind of courses and what should be in there. It doesn't go on anymore.
As a follow-up on that, does Yale still offer a good grounding in Western Civ?
Not as good as it used to, is my answer. We don't have, I'm trying to, I can't, even when I came in, we didn't, we didn't really have an organized program for the entire student community aimed at an education in Western civilization. But because it was so traditional, the curriculum was so traditional, it would be easy for a student to put it together by taking a collection of courses. Yale had and has, this is one thing I'm still very proud that we do, is the Directed Studies program, which is a crafted Western civilization program for freshmen in the whole freshman year. And it is what you're talking about. But it's only for a limited number of students. You have to compete to get into it. So I think that's one thing that's very positive. So I was about to think of another, but it's going to take me a long time.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Professor Kagan. I'm a rising junior in Yale College. I study classical civilizations, and I really yearn to study the humanities in the way you've talked about. But like you said, these sorts of scholarly techniques have taken over the humanities departments. Do you have any advice for me, how to approach my studies or those sorts of things?
You may have already done this, but try to make the most careful evaluation you can of faculty, either directly in your own central thing, or anybody at Yale that looks he might fit, and determine that person will do it the way I want it done, and then find a way to get into that course. Because I really do think that, in my experience, that's been the richest experience for so very many students. If they do find a few professors that match them in what they're interested in and how they proceed, that makes them happy. That produces the results they want. And to some degree, that's always been true. It's just that I think it's harder to find people who aren't typical of the zeitgeist to do it. But I'm not convinced there aren't any. It's just, but it's going to be hard. Look carefully. And if you discover any, tell your friends.
One final question.
I have two questions. One is going back to the book question. Of all your books, which is your favorite in terms of what's going on today? That's question one.
That is pretty easy. It's called Historical Studies in the Origins of War.
Okay, great. Question two. I think we have actually a national emergency in terms of what's happened to our faculties, the free speech problems that the Institute has emphasized, and the description of what's happened to history departments. And I'm going to propose that you have provided a start of a solution, which is you have one course, as I understand, on Yale online education, right? And I'm thinking that if we had more courses like yours that was not only available to the Yale community, but actually nationwide, we could correct or start to correct the problem of political correctness taking over.
Well, as you know, there's quite a few courses by Yale professors online. Did you know that?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think they should do more? Oh, that's gonna be hard to do. That's gonna be hard to do. No, I won't be able to do that. I'm actually leaving town at the end of the summer and moving out, so I won't be able to do any Yale stuff anyway. But I'm so old and battered that you want to get some more youthful stuff out there. No, I mean it does trouble me a great deal when I see that we're not making progress, but we seem to be regressing. And time is against us, because a lot of it has to do with what was customary, and then when what customary changes, it's another world. And so I really don't want to leave you with a pessimistic statement, but I'm just not smart enough to think of a different one. Thank you so much.